She sat quietly in the corner seat of the crowded airport terminal, clutching her small bag close to her chest. The announcement for her flight echoed through the speakers and her heart skipped a beat. It was finally happening. She was about to get on a plane for the first time in her life. She took a deep breath, but it didn't calm her much. Her palms were damp, and her eyes kept wandering to the large glass window where planes moved across the runway like silver birds. They looked peaceful from afar, but she couldn't shake off the fear inside her. Flying felt like stepping into the unknown. For years, she had avoided traveling by air. Trains and buses were more than enough for her. But this time, she had no choice. Her sister's wedding was across the country, and she had promised to be there. Her sister had even joked on the phone, saying, "Don't back out this time. It's not that scary." She wanted to believe that. But as she stood in line for boarding, her hands trembled slightly while she handed her ticket to the attendant. The woman smiled warmly and said, "First time flying?" She must have seen the nervousness in her face. "Yes," she whispered. "You'll be fine," the attendant said. "Just relax and enjoy the view once you're up there. It's beautiful." The words helped a little. She nodded politely and walked down the narrow jet bridge, the sound of her footsteps echoing in her ears. When she stepped onto the plane, she felt the air change, cooler, quieter, and strangely enclosed. Rows of seats stretched out before her, and passengers were already finding their places, tucking bags into overhead bins and settling in with practiced ease. She looked around, feeling out of place among people who seemed to belong there. A businessman tapped on his laptop, a young couple took selfies, and a child pressed his face against the window. Everyone looked so calm, like they had done this 100 times. Her seat was by the window, not her choice, but maybe it was meant to be. She placed her small bag under the seat in front of her and sat down, trying to steady her breathing. She fastened her seatbelt and looked out the window. The plane beside theirs was already rolling down the runway, its engines roaring. The sound made her heart pound faster. A man sat down beside her, older and kind-looking, with a calm smile. He greeted her politely and noticed how tightly she was gripping her armrest. "First flight?" he asked in a gentle voice. She nodded again. "Is it that obvious?" He chuckled softly. "Don't worry. I've been flying for years. It's safer than driving, you know." She smiled faintly, appreciating the kindness in his tone. He started telling her stories about his travels and about different cities, the people he'd met, and the small adventures along the way. His calmness made her feel a bit better. For a few minutes, she forgot how nervous she was. Then the flight attendant's voice came over the speaker, welcoming everyone on board and explaining safety instructions. While most passengers were scrolling through their phones or staring out the window, she listened carefully to every word. She followed along as the attendant demonstrated how to fasten the seatbelt, use the oxygen mask, and locate the exits. When the attendant showed how to brace for an emergency landing, a few people laughed quietly. But she didn't. She paid attention, almost memorizing it all. Something inside her told her it mattered. The engine started to hum louder and the plane began to move. Her heart raced. The man beside her smiled reassuringly. "This is the easy part. You'll see." The plane taxied down the runway, slowly at first, then faster, much faster. The sound grew louder until everything vibrated slightly. She pressed herself into the seat, her stomach tightening. And then, with a smooth lift, the ground began to fall away. Her heart jumped as she looked out the window and saw the city shrinking beneath her. Roads looked like thin lines, cars like tiny dots. She gasped softly, and when it was terrifying but also beautiful. The sunlight hit the clouds just right, turning them into shades of gold and white. For a moment, her fear faded. The flight attendants moved down the aisle, checking belts and offering water. The seatbelt sign turned off and passengers began to relax. Some opened books, others ordered drinks, and the soft hum of conversation filled the cabin. She sat quietly, staring at the horizon. She still felt nervous, but there was something comforting about the steady rhythm of the plane. She couldn't believe she was actually in the sky. The man beside her asked, "So where are you headed?" "My sister's wedding," she said. "She's been begging me to come by plane for years." I finally gave in, he smiled. "You'll be glad you did. Flying opens up the world in ways we don't expect." She nodded slowly. Maybe he was right. Maybe facing her fear was part of what she needed to do. As time passed, she started to relax. She leaned back in her seat and watched the clouds float by. The plane moved smoothly, and for a while she even forgot she was afraid. She thought about her sister, her family waiting at the airport, and the laughter they would share at the wedding. When the flight attendants came around with snacks, She accepted a small cup of juice. The woman serving her smiled and said, "How's the flight so far?" "Not as bad as I thought," she replied honestly. "Good to hear," the attendant said warmly before moving on. She sipped her drink and glanced out the window again. The sky was calm, soft, and endless. The man beside her was now reading a magazine, humming quietly to himself. Everything felt peaceful. She started to think about how silly her fear seemed now. The plane was steady, the air quiet, and the crew professional. Maybe flying wasn't as dangerous as she had imagined. Still, she couldn't help noticing every small sound, the slight rattle of a tray, the distant creak of the cabin. Each one made her tense for a moment before she reminded herself to breathe. A few rows ahead, a little girl giggled as she tried to catch sunlight on her hand. The sight made her smile. There was something magical about being above the clouds, away from the noise and rush of life below. After an hour, the pilot spoke over the intercom. His calm, confident voice filled the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're flying at an altitude of 35,000 feet. Smooth air ahead, clear skies all the way to our destination." Everyone seemed pleased to hear that. A few people clapped lightly. She felt a sense of relief. Maybe this flight would be simple and uneventful, just how she hoped. She closed her eyes for a while, trying to rest. The gentle vibration of the plane was oddly soothing now. For the first time, she felt proud of herself for facing this fear. She was doing something she had always avoided, and it wasn't so bad after all. But even as she rested, a tiny thought lingered in the back of her mind. What if something went wrong? She quickly brushed it away. Everything looked calm. The flight attendants were smiling. The passengers were relaxed. The pilot had said the weather was perfect. She looked out the window one more time. The sky was a deep blue, stretching endlessly in every direction. The clouds below looked like soft fields of cotton. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful. She didn't know it yet, but this calm moment was just the beginning. In a few hours, the sky would not be so friendly. The world above the clouds would turn from quiet to chaos. For now, though, she sat quietly, unaware of what was coming, her heart slowly settling into the rhythm of the flight. She didn't know that the same instructions she had carefully memorized before takeoff, the ones most passengers ignored, would soon make her the person everyone would look to when things went wrong. For the first time in her life, she was flying, and though fear still lingered, there was also something else, a quiet strength she didn't know she had. The flight had been smooth for more than an hour, and the nervous woman began to feel a little more confident. She looked around the cabin, noticing how peaceful everyone seemed. A few people were watching movies on their screens, some were reading books, and others had fallen asleep with their heads resting against the windows. The sound of the engines had become a kind of background hum, steady and calm. The man sitting beside her smiled when he saw her looking around. "See," he said kindly. "Nothing to worry about. You're doing great." She smiled back, her fingers no longer gripping the armrest as tightly. "It's not as bad as I thought," she admitted. "That's how it starts," he chuckled. "After this flight, you'll be ready for the next one." She laughed softly, the tension in her shoulders easing. She even dared to glance down through the window again. The world below looked so far away. Mountains like wrinkles on the earth, rivers glinting like silver ribbons, and clouds casting long shadows over the land. It was strange how small everything looked. When the attendants came down the aisle with the food cart, she accepted a sandwich and a small cup of tea. The smell of warm bread filled the air, and for the first time since takeoff, she actually enjoyed herself. She looked at her watch and thought about how her sister must be getting ready for the wedding rehearsal. She smiled, imagining her surprised face when she walked through the door the next day. She ate slowly, glancing occasionally at the screen that showed their flight path. The little plane icon was moving steadily across the map, and that simple line of progress brought her comfort. Everything felt under control. But not long after lunch was served, the cabin lights flickered for just a second, so brief that most people didn't notice. She did. Her eyes moved toward the overhead lights, but when they steadied again, she tried to ignore it. Probably nothing. Planes must have small glitches sometimes. Still, a quiet unease began to settle inside her. The pilot's calm voice came over the speaker a few minutes later. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're expecting some light turbulence ahead as we pass through a weather system. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. The announcement didn't seem to worry anyone. Most passengers barely reacted, but she felt her heart start to race again. She quickly buckled her seatbelt tighter and looked outside. The clouds ahead looked a bit darker, heavier. Soon the plane began to shake lightly, the kind of bump that makes your stomach flutter for a second. The man beside her smiled reassuringly. This is normal. Happens all the time. She nodded, pretending to be calm, but her hands were already gripping the armrests again. The plane dipped slightly, then steadied. Another small jolt followed. A few people laughed nervously, and one of the attendants walked down the aisle, checking if everyone was buckled. But then the shaking grew stronger. Cups rattled on trays. The overhead bins creaked. The laughter stopped. The man beside her frowned slightly. That's a bit rougher than usual, he said quietly. The plane jolted again, this time harder. Someone gasped. The child across the aisle began to cry. The seatbelt sign blinked brighter as the plane seemed to tremble in the air. She felt her stomach twist. Her first flight, and now this? She closed her eyes for a moment, whispering a quiet prayer under her breath. The flight attendants moved quickly, holding onto seat backs for balance as they made sure everyone was seated. One of them, a young woman with calm eyes, smiled reassuringly as she passed. It's all right, folks. Just a bit of turbulence. Perfectly normal. Her voice helped, at least for a moment. The passengers tried to relax again. But the shaking didn't stop. It went on, longer and harder. The sound of the engine seemed louder now, almost like they were straining against something. Outside, flashes of light appeared in the distance, not close, but visible enough to make her heart beat faster. A storm, she thought. They were flying straight into a storm. The plane suddenly dropped a few feet, a quick but violent lurch that made everyone gasp. Her body lifted slightly off the seat before the belt pulled her back. Trays slid off tables, drinks spilled, and a sharp cry came from somewhere behind. She grabbed the man's arm without even realizing it. He didn't mind. His face was tense now, too. It's okay, he said softly, though his tone wasn't as steady as before. The lights flickered again. The shaking continued, heavy, uneven, like the sky was tossing them around. For the first time, she noticed fear in the eyes of the flight attendants. They were trying to stay calm, but their movements were quick and uncertain. One of them reached for the intercom, probably to say something, but before she could speak, another drop hit, harder than before. People screamed. The plane tilted to one side. Luggage in the overhead compartments rattled violently. The woman could hear a faint noise, like something metallic scraping against the hull. Or maybe it was just her imagination. She could feel every movement of the aircraft now, every vibration. Her breathing came faster. Her mind went back to the safety instructions. She remembered every word the attendant had said before takeoff. Fasten your seatbelt low and tight. Secure your own mask before helping others. The flight attendants rushed to their jump seats, strapping themselves in. The captain's voice came on again, louder this time, but still calm. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated and fasten your seatbelts. We're passing through some severe turbulence. Everything is under control. Everything is under control. She repeated those words in her mind like a mantra. But her body told a different story. Her heart was pounding, her hands shaking. The man beside her closed his eyes tightly, muttering something under his breath. The plane rocked again. Another scream echoed. Then suddenly it steadied, almost as if the sky had let go. The sound of the engines returned to normal. The shaking faded slowly, like a storm losing strength. No one spoke for a few seconds. The silence that followed was heavy. Then a few nervous laughs broke through, followed by sighs of relief. Someone clapped softly, and a few others joined in. The strange way people sometimes react when fear suddenly leaves them. She let out a long breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her whole body was trembling. See? The man said after a moment, trying to sound brave again. Just turbulence. She nodded, but something deep inside her wasn't convinced. She glanced out the window. The clouds still looked dark, and the light outside had changed. The sky had a strange color now, a grayish tone that didn't feel right. The attendants moved through the aisle again, checking on passengers, picking up fallen trays, comforting a few shaken travelers. One stopped beside her row and smiled weakly. "You okay, ma'am?" "I think so," she said softly. "That was a lot." "It's over now," the attendant said. though her voice carried a tired edge. The passengers began to settle again, but the energy in the cabin had changed. The light chatter that had filled the air before was gone. Now there was only quiet, the kind that comes after fear. The woman leaned back, her body still tense. She looked at her hands, still trembling slightly. She had thought the worst part of her first flight would be her nerves before takeoff, not this. The man beside her sighed. "That was a rough patch," he said. "But at least it's behind us." She nodded, but something about his words felt too easy. She couldn't explain it, but her instincts whispered that the worst hadn't passed yet. There was something in the air, a feeling she couldn't name. The captain's voice returned one last time. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've passed the rough weather. Please remain seated for now. We'll keep you updated." His tone was calm, but behind it she thought she heard something else. Fatigue, maybe worry. She wasn't sure. The sky outside looked calmer now, but her heart wouldn't settle. She turned her gaze toward the aisle, watching the attendants quietly whispering to each other near the galley. Their faces looked strained. She didn't know what they were talking about, but she could sense that whatever had just happened wasn't entirely normal. She turned back to the window and tried to breathe slowly, trying to convince herself that everything was fine. The flight seemed stable again. The passengers were beginning to relax, but somewhere deep in her chest that quiet unease refused to fade. She couldn't shake the thought that the calm they were feeling now wasn't real calm. It was only a pause before something much bigger. The plane had barely settled after the turbulence when it jolted again. Harder this time. The vibration ran through every seat, making the woman's stomach twist. Drink sloshed over the edges of cups, and the child across the aisle screamed, clinging to his mother's arm. The calm that had returned moments ago vanished in an instant. She gripped her seat tightly, trying to steady herself, but it was impossible. The plane lurched to the side, and she could hear the low groan of the engine straining. Panic began to ripple through the cabin. People shouted, some prayed quietly, and a few children cried loudly, their parents trying desperately to console them. The pilot's voice came over the intercom, calm but firm. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain in your seats and fasten your seatbelts. We are experiencing unexpected turbulence. Remain calm and follow crew instructions." She could feel the difference now. This was not the light turbulence from before. It was stronger, more unpredictable. The plane dipped suddenly, and for a heartbeat her stomach felt like it had left her body. She clutched the armrest, her knuckles white. The man beside her leaned over. "Just stay calm." "Listen to the instructions," he said, though his voice was tighter than before. She nodded, swallowing hard. Her mind raced through the safety briefing she had paid attention to earlier. She remembered every step. Secure your own mask first, keep your seatbelt tight, help others only if you can. That simple advice now felt like a lifeline. Suddenly, a loud alarm echoed through the cabin. The oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling with a sharp clang. People froze in shock, unsure what to do. The child across the aisle began to cry harder. The woman's heart pounded, but she didn't panic. She reached up instinctively, pulling the mask toward her face, securing it over her nose and mouth. Her hands trembled as she adjusted the straps. Beside her, the man struggled with his own mask. She leaned over quickly, helping him, showing him how to tighten it. "Here, like this," she said softly. His eyes widened with relief, and he nodded, securing it properly. All around her, the plane pitched violently. The lights flickered, and an uncomfortable hum filled the cabin. The flight attendants were struggling to stay upright, moving quickly to check on passengers. Their calm smiles now replaced with urgency. A woman in the row ahead was crying, her baby's pacifier lost in the chaos. The woman immediately moved forward, crouching to help her. "It's okay. Put this on," she said, handing her own mask until the mother could secure it for the child. Time felt distorted. The plane lurched again, tilting sharply. Screams erupted from all directions. She could feel the cabin shaking beneath her, the metal structure groaning under pressure. Every instinct told her to panic, but she remembered one thing clearly. Remain calm, act clearly, and focus. She looked around quickly, assessing the situation. Many passengers were frozen, unable to act, their faces pale with fear. Others were moving too quickly, panicked and disoriented. She realized that if someone didn't take charge, things could get worse. The flight attendants were trying to direct passengers, but the chaos was overwhelming. She stood in her seat as best as she could, reaching out to steady those around her. "Sit down, buckle up. Stay calm," she shouted, her voice rising above the screaming and the roar of the engines. People turned to her, eyes wide with fear. Something about her tone, firm but not frantic, cut through the panic. A few passengers began to follow her instructions, tightening their belts and bracing themselves against the seat. The man beside her grabbed her hand briefly. "How are you staying so calm?" he asked almost incredulously. "I just have to," she replied. Her voice was steady, though her body was shaking. "We need to stay alive. Follow the instructions. That's all we can do." The plane dropped again. This time the descent felt longer, sharper. The woman gritted her teeth, holding herself in place, guiding others as best as she could. A young woman across the aisle was struggling to secure her mask. She rushed over, showing her quickly how to pull the straps tight and breathe slowly. The cabin was chaos. People screaming, crying, some praying, some frozen in fear. The woman moved from seat to seat, helping where she could. She had never flown before, and yet in this moment she felt a clarity she had never experienced in her life. The pilot's voice came over again. "We are losing cabin pressure. Oxygen masks are deployed. Please secure your own mask first and assist those around you if possible." Her heart raced. Losing cabin pressure was serious. She could feel the fear rising again, but she pushed it down, focusing on what she had to do. She had helped the man beside her, the child across the aisle, and now she turned to another passenger struggling with a mask. "Here, like this. Don't panic. Breathe slowly," she instructed. The man nodded, tears running down his face. She smiled at him reassuringly. "We can do this," she said quietly. The plane shook violently again, and she instinctively crouched, holding onto her seat. The people around her began to mirror her movements, taking her lead. She realized something important, even in the most terrifying moments. If someone stays calm and acts clearly, it can spread to others. A loud thud came from somewhere in the cabin, followed by the sound of a tray crashing to the floor. Someone screamed behind her. She took a deep breath, remembering that panic only made things worse. She stood up slightly again, shouting over the noise, "Stay in your seats!" "Hold on. Help each other if you can." People were starting to listen now. The flight attendants were moving quickly, securing themselves but also directing passengers. The woman saw a mother struggling with a toddler who was crying uncontrollably. She moved forward, crouching and holding the child's hands gently. "It's okay," she said. "You're safe. We're going to get through this together." The plane dipped again, sharply this time, and she stumbled slightly. Her heart was hammering, but she held her ground, steadying herself against the seat and guiding those around her. She could feel the weight of responsibility pressing on her, but she didn't panic. Fear was there, yes, but it didn't control her. She noticed a few passengers staring at her, eyes wide. She realized they were looking for guidance, someone to follow when everything else felt out of control. She had never imagined that she would be that person. The plane shook again, violently this time, and a metallic groan echoed through the cabin. Oxygen masks were in place, people were bracing, and the woman moved quickly, checking on anyone struggling. She helped a man tighten his belt, showed a woman how to hold on to the seat in front of her, and reassured a child that it would be okay. The flight attendants began moving down the aisle, coordinating with her now. One of them whispered, "Thank you. You're helping keep everyone calm." She shook her head quickly. "We all have to," she said. "Just stay focused." Minutes felt like hours. The plane continued to dip and shake unpredictably, the engines roaring as if fighting against the sky itself. The woman kept moving, helping, instructing, and calming. She forgot herself entirely, living only in the moment, in the people around her, in the immediate need to survive. She remembered every word of the safety briefing now, every little detail she had paid attention to before takeoff. She saw how it mattered, knowing what to do, when to do it, and how to act calmly. It wasn't just theory anymore. It was the difference between panic and survival. As the plane continued to struggle, she felt a strange sense of clarity. Despite the fear, despite the chaos, she could think clearly. She could act. She could help. And for the first time in her life, she realized that courage wasn't about not being afraid. It was about acting despite fear. She looked around once more. Passengers were following her lead, at least some of them. They were bracing correctly, holding on to the seats, helping each other. The flight attendants were coordinating, but she was the calm center in the middle of the storm. Then the captain's voice returned over the intercom, calmer this time. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are working to stabilize the aircraft. Please remain seated and secure your masks. We will provide updates as soon as possible. She nodded, acknowledging the words silently. Every instruction mattered. Every movement counted, and she would make sure that everyone around her followed through. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know if the turbulence would worsen or if the plane would hold. But she knew one thing: she could not give in to panic. She could not allow fear to take over. And in that moment, in the middle of the chaos, she understood something about herself. She was braver than she had ever imagined. She was stronger than she had believed. And even in a plane full of strangers, she could make a difference. The storm outside raged on, but inside the cabin, a quiet determination had formed. She had never flown before, and yet now she was the one everyone was looking at, the one everyone was following. The plane was still shaking, though slightly less than before, but the fear in the cabin had not diminished. The woman kept her mask firmly on, her eyes scanning the rows of passengers. Her stomach was tense, her muscles sore from gripping the armrest for so long, yet her mind remained focused. Every action mattered now, and she had no room for panic. She noticed the flight attendants moving more urgently than before, communicating with each other with quick gestures and sharp looks. One of them came down the aisle and whispered to her, "We're preparing for an emergency landing. It's going to be rough. We need everyone calm and ready." Her heart skipped a beat. Emergency landing. She had never imagined she would be in this position on her very first flight. But she didn't falter. She took a deep breath, trying to steady the tremor in her hands. Her role was clear, and she had to help, guide, and stay calm. The man beside her leaned closer, his face pale. "An emergency landing? What does that mean?" he asked quietly, almost afraid to hear the answer. "It means we need to follow instructions perfectly," she said calmly, gripping his arm gently. "Stay in your seat, keep your seatbelt tight, brace for impact, and listen to the crew. We can do this together." She looked around and realized that many passengers were frozen, staring at the ceiling, the windows, or each other. Some were quietly crying. Others whispered prayers. She could see the terror in their eyes, and she understood that now, more than ever, someone needed to lead. She moved slightly in her seat, shouting over the rising noise, "Everyone, buckle your seatbelts. Brace, keep your masks on. Look out for the person next to you." Her voice was firm, loud enough to reach the passengers a few rows away. A few people immediately responded, tightening their belts, securing their masks, and helping each other. She realized that by acting decisively, she was giving them hope. Fear was contagious, but so was calm. The pilot's voice returned over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are initiating an emergency landing. Please assume the brace position immediately. Remain calm and follow all crew instructions. Your safety depends on it." The woman shifted forward slightly, bracing herself against the seat in front of her. She glanced around, making sure others were following the instructions. Some were struggling. A woman with a small child didn't know how to adjust her seatbelt properly. She moved quickly, crouching down, showing her the correct way to buckle it and tightening it firmly. The plane dipped sharply again, and her stomach flipped. The turbulence outside had returned, and this time it was unpredictable, tossing the aircraft from side to side. Screams filled the cabin. The sound was deafening, but she held on to a single thought: help others, stay calm, survive. She helped a man across the aisle who had dropped his mask. "Here," she said, handing it to him. "Secure it tight. Breathe slowly. It's going to be okay." His eyes met hers, and for a moment the terror in them softened. He nodded, adjusting the mask carefully. She realized that in this storm, small acts of guidance could save lives. Her first instinct, her calm voice, and her ability to act quickly were what kept people from panicking completely. The flight attendants continued their work, moving down the aisle with a mixture of urgency and fatigue. She noticed one young attendant struggling with a passenger who refused to follow instructions. She stepped in, guiding the person with firm, gentle words, helping the attendant regain control of the situation. The plane jolted again, violently this time, tilting sharply to the left. She braced herself, gripping the seat tightly. Around her, others were following her lead, holding onto armrests, keeping their heads down and trying to stay calm. She realized that her own composure was spreading through the cabin like a thread of hope. She turned her attention to the passengers she had been watching closely, the elderly, the children, the visibly frightened. She crouched beside them, adjusting masks, showing them how to brace and whispering words of reassurance. You're going to be okay. Just hold on. Stay with me. The engines roared louder, straining against the turbulent air. She could feel the pressure shifting, the plane dipping and rising unpredictably. A metallic groan echoed somewhere above, making her flinch. But she didn't stop helping. She moved from seat to seat, checking everyone she could reach. The captain's voice returned over the intercom, steady but tense. We are approaching the landing site. Brace yourselves and follow all instructions carefully. Remain calm. We will get through this together. The woman nodded as if responding directly to him. She felt a strange sense of connection, not just with the crew but with every passenger who was looking to her for guidance. She had never flown before, but now she understood something vital. Courage was contagious. Calm was contagious. And in a moment like this, they could not afford to panic. The plane dipped sharply again, and a scream echoed from the back. She turned her head and saw a young man clutching the seat in front of him, his knuckles white. She leaned over and shouted, "Hold on! Brace yourself, look at me. We can do this!" He looked at her, eyes wide with terror, and followed her instructions. He braced, held on, and focused on her voice. She realized that she was the thread holding the cabin together, even if just for a moment. The turbulence seemed to last forever. The plane tilted, dropped, and rose unpredictably. Yet inside her, a sense of determination grew stronger. She could not give up. She could not let fear take over. Every instruction she had remembered, every piece of advice from the pre-flight safety briefing, every instinct she had, it all mattered now. She saw a mother struggling to help her baby. She crouched beside her, adjusting the straps of the life vest and securing the child in her mother's arms. "Breathe," she said softly. "We are going to get through this." The engines roared again, louder than ever. The plane lurched to the right, almost tipping. Passengers screamed. The flight attendants were shouting instructions over the chaos, moving with determination. She followed their lead, helping those she could reach, calming the frightened and guiding the confused. Time became meaningless. The seconds stretched into minutes that felt like hours. She didn't think about herself, didn't think about what was happening outside. All that mattered was the people around her, helping them survive, guiding them through the chaos, keeping them calm. Another violent jolt hit, and she braced herself, gripping the seat tightly. The plane tilted sharply again, and she could hear the metallic groan of the cabin as it resisted the pressure. She closed her eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and reminded herself, calm, focus, act. The cabin lights flickered but stayed on. The oxygen masks hung from the ceiling, swaying slightly. Passengers followed her instructions, tightening belts, bracing correctly, and trying to remain calm. She moved again, crouching beside a man who was panicking, showing him how to hold onto the seat and breathe slowly. She realized something powerful. Even in the midst of chaos, people could listen. Even when fear was overwhelming, clear instructions and calm actions could save lives. She had never imagined that on her first flight, she would become the anchor for so many people. The pilot's voice came over once more. "Prepare for impact. Follow all crew instructions. Remain calm. We will land safely." She nodded, her heart racing but her mind clear. She moved down the aisle as best she could, helping passengers with braces, adjusting belts, and offering words of comfort. Every small action mattered. Every calm word mattered. The plane descended rapidly now, shaking and tilting. She braced herself once more, guiding the passengers she could see, holding on to their hands when necessary, whispering encouragement. "We're almost there. Stay with me. Follow the instructions. Hold on." She looked around, noticing how many were following her lead. She realized then that courage and calm could spread like a chain reaction. Even in a plane full of strangers, her actions were giving people the strength to survive. The plane dipped once more, violently, and she held on tightly. The engines roared. The cabin groaned. The passengers braced, listened, and followed her instructions. For the first time in her life, she felt an overwhelming sense of purpose. She had never flown before, and now she was the one everyone was looking to, the one keeping calm, guiding, and helping. And in that moment, as the plane continued its desperate descent toward the landing site, she realized something important. Sometimes courage isn't about the absence of fear. Sometimes it's about standing firm, acting clearly, and helping others when fear surrounds you. The plane was descending rapidly now, cutting through the clouds with the roar of the engines echoing through the cabin. Every jolt sent a shiver through the passengers, but the woman remained focused. Her mask was secure, her hands gripping the armrest. and her mind fixed on one goal: help everyone survive. The flight attendants were guiding passengers as best they could, shouting instructions over the chaos. But their voices barely reached some corners of the cabin. The woman moved down the aisle, crouching beside those who were struggling, offering a firm hand or a calming word. Every second mattered, and she couldn't waste a single one. "Brace! Brace! Hold on!" she shouted, her voice rising above the roar of the engines. She leaned over a mother struggling with a toddler. "Bend forward, hold on to your legs. Keep your mask on! You can do this." The toddler whimpered, but the mother followed her instructions, bracing as best she could. Nearby, a young man clutched the seat in front of him, eyes wide with fear. She grabbed his hands, showing him how to hold on and breathe. "It's going to be okay. Follow my lead. Just stay with me," she said, her voice calm but firm. Outside, the storm raged. Flashes of lightning illuminated the clouds, followed by the distant rumble of thunder. Rain battered the fuselage, and the plane shuddered violently. The cabin was filled with screams, prayers, and cries of fear, yet the woman continued to move from row to row, steadying, guiding, and comforting. She reached the back of the plane, where a family was struggling with two small children. The father looked paralyzed with fear, unsure how to help. She crouched beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Secure the children first," she instructed. "Follow the brace position. You can do this. We'll get through it together." He nodded, swallowing hard, and followed her guidance. The children's eyes were wide with fear, but with the woman's calm instructions, they adjusted their seatbelts and leaned into the brace position. A flight attendant came over to assist, and together they guided the family safely. The plane tilted sharply again, and a metallic groan echoed through the cabin. Overhead, bins rattled, and a tray crashed to the floor, spilling its contents. The screams rose again, but she didn't falter. She kept moving, checking masks, guiding hands, and whispering encouragement. The man who had been sitting beside her since the beginning of the flight looked at her in disbelief. "How are you so calm?" he asked, his voice trembling. "I just have to be," she replied. "Focus, follow instructions. Help others. That's all we can do." Another sharp dip hit the plane, and she pressed herself against the seat, bracing. The flight attendants moved quickly, directing passengers to hold on tightly. Some passengers were panicked, moving too fast, but she guided them, showing them exactly how to position themselves and tighten their belts. The intercom crackled, and the captain's voice came through. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are approaching the landing area. Please remain in your brace positions. Follow all crew instructions. We will land shortly." The words brought a mixture of hope and tension. Everyone listened intently, clinging to the instructions like a lifeline. She moved again, checking rows, helping passengers adjust, reassuring them. Her voice had become the thread holding many people together. The plane shuddered violently, and water or mist began to appear outside the windows. She couldn't see clearly, but the sound of rain or spray hitting the fuselage made her heart race. She leaned over the aisle, guiding a woman and her child. "Hold them close, brace! Keep your heads down." The descent felt endless. The woman's body ached from crouching and holding herself tensely for so long, but her mind was sharp. Every second, every small movement counted. She could see the passengers around her looking to her for guidance. Even those who had been panicked moments ago were following her instructions, mirroring her calmness. A sudden lurch threw some passengers forward despite their belts. She was immediately at their side, steadying them, whispering words of reassurance. "It's okay, hold on. Focus on your breathing. We're almost there." The plane continued to fight against the storm. Lightning flashed, illuminating terrified faces and trembling hands. Rain lashed against the fuselage, and the engines roared louder than ever. Through it all, she kept moving, helping anyone in reach, offering words of guidance and comfort. She noticed the flight attendants struggling to maintain control at the front. They were exhausted, but their training had kept them moving. She instinctively took small steps forward to help coordinate the panicked passengers, offering calm instructions in between the flight attendants' commands. The captain's voice came again. "Brace positions, everyone. We are moments from landing. Follow all instructions. We will get through this." She tightened her own brace, leaning into the seat, and checked the passengers around her. Everyone she could reach was secured, bracing as instructed, masks on, belts tight. Even some who had been frozen with fear earlier were now following the lead she provided, listening to her words and actions. The plane dipped sharply again, and she felt the jolt reverberate through her body. She pressed herself into the seat, bracing as instructed but kept her eyes on the cabin, watching for anyone who needed guidance. Her voice cut through the chaos. "Hold on, brace. Stay calm, we can do this." A man near the back was panicking, shouting and moving too much. She crouched beside him, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. "Look at me. Follow my lead. Stay in your seat. Brace properly. Breathe. Focus. You can do this." His movements slowed, his eyes locked on hers, and he followed her instructions. She realized in that moment how much of a difference calm, decisive action could make. Panic was contagious, but so was courage. The plane continued its rapid descent, but her focus never wavered. She moved from row to row, checking, guiding, and encouraging. Each small action mattered. She whispered words of reassurance, corrected posture, tightened belts, and helped secure masks. The engines roared again, louder, more urgent. The plane tilted sharply, then leveled. The storm outside continued, lightning flashing across the clouds, rain lashing the windows. She felt every tremor, every vibration, every groan of the fuselage. And yet through it all she continued. She had never flown before, and yet she was now the steady hand guiding strangers through terror. She realized that courage wasn't about not being afraid. It was about acting despite fear, guiding others despite uncertainty. The landing area was finally approaching. The flight attendant shouted instructions to prepare for impact. She moved quickly, checking that passengers were braced, belts tight, masks secured. She crouched beside a mother and child, whispering reassurance. "Almost there. Stay with me. We'll make it." The plane tilted violently, then leveled again. She held on tightly, bracing herself, whispering encouragement to anyone who looked at her. She saw passengers gripping each other, following her calm instructions, and she felt a strange sense of quiet power, the power of human courage in the face of fear. The engines roared as the plane finally touched down, water or rain spraying across the fuselage. The landing was rough, jolting everyone violently, but the passengers who had followed her guidance braced correctly and held on. The plane skidded along the surface, groaning and rattling, but it remained intact. When it finally came to a stop, silence fell over the cabin for a moment, broken only by heavy breathing and the soft sobs of relief. She unbuckled her belt carefully and helped the passengers near her do the same. Some couldn't believe they had survived. The flight attendants began opening doors and guiding passengers out. She moved quickly, helping the elderly, the children, and anyone who seemed uncertain about how to proceed. Her calm instructions kept people moving in an organized way, avoiding chaos in the moments after the landing. Outside, rescue boats and personnel were waiting. She helped a mother and her child into a boat, then assisted a man who had been panicking throughout the flight. Her focus never wavered, guiding, helping, and calming. When everyone was safely off the plane, she finally allowed herself to breathe deeply. Her body shook, not from fear anymore, but from exhaustion. She looked around at the other passengers, the frightened faces now filled with gratitude, relief, and awe. Many approached her, thanking her quietly, some with tears in their eyes. The flight attendants and even the captain came over. The captain looked at her with a mix of surprise and respect. "You kept everyone calm," he said quietly. "Your actions help more than you know." "Thank you." She shook her head, overwhelmed. "I was just trying to help," she said softly. But she knew the truth. Her calmness, her quick thinking, her willingness to act, it had made a real difference. People had looked at her for guidance, and she had given them hope and instructions that kept them alive. She had never flown before, yet in the face of disaster, she had become a leader. Hours later, wrapped in a blanket on a rescue boat, watching the storm continue to rage around them, she let herself finally feel the weight of what had happened. She was alive. The people she had helped were alive. And for the first time in her life, she realized that courage wasn't about not being afraid. It was about facing fear, acting despite it, and helping others when it mattered most. When she finally returned home and shared her story, people were amazed. Reporters called her the woman who saved dozens, though she insisted she had only done what anyone could have. The captain and crew credited her for keeping the cabin calm during the worst moments, saying her guidance had prevented even more panic and potential injury. For a woman who had never flown before, the experience had changed her forever. She understood herself in a way she never had before, her courage, her calmness under pressure, and her ability to help others in crisis. And though she hoped never to face such terror again, She knew she could face anything life threw her way.